disastrous. Right, it's time now for Head to Head.
Head to Head.
Well, joining us this morning for Head to Head is Vincent Moss, who's a political commentator and former political editor at the Sunday Mirror, and also Albie Amankona, political commentator with Young Voices UK. Good morning to the both of you.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well.
So there really is only one story, isn't there? I mean, in terms of, King Charles was right. Oh dear. Vincent, your take so far. I mean, clearly all this happened yesterday. What did you make of it?
I think we're running out of superlatives, aren't we? I mean, it's chaos, catastrophe, as William Hague said. It's just dreadful, and I think very, very worrying for all your listeners and viewers. It's just a depressing time, and we all just sort of sit here waiting to see what happens on Monday morning when the markets open and whether they feel reassured enough to not send the financial world into a spiral again.
Well, I mean, in terms of what happened yesterday, were you surprised in the way that Liz Truss knifed Kwasi Kwarteng in the back, called him back, he landed? There were helicopter shots of his car approaching Downing Street. He didn't know what was about to happen, and he got thrown under the bus.
That's right, it's humiliating. They're politically close, personal friends, and he must be one of the few people that's been sacked for doing exactly what his boss told him to do. Did everything that he was asked to do, and was fired up. And we learned that he apparently found out on Twitter, reading a report in the Times, as he was returning to London, and Jeremy Hunt knew he had the job before Kwasi Kwarteng knew he was sacked. So, yeah, another debacle and bad handling of a bad situation. I feel sorry for him because he was just following orders, and he's lost his job for doing what he was told.
What do you think, Albie? I mean, clearly they're very friendly. They wrote this together. She signed it off. She's thrown him under the bus.
Yes, indeed. Politics is moving so quickly at the moment, it's actually quite difficult to keep up. But look, ultimately, I think either the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, had to go, or she had to find a fool guy. And she found a fool guy in Kwasi Kwarteng. Now, I think historically, if we look at Prime Ministers who have had to either sack their Chancellors or their Chancellors have resigned, if we look at Boris Johnson, it's not a very good track record. So I think the question is now, will Liz Truss be able to survive until the midterm fiscal statement on the 31st of October?
And the answer?
I think it is uncertain, David. We've got to see what the markets do on Monday in response to Jeremy Hunt's media round this weekend, which I think actually has been going quite well so far.
Has it? So interesting on that, and we'll come back to what she's actually done. So, well, actually, let's do it now. Just in terms of the way that she stood on this mandate, right, of her mini-fiscal statement. So she went round and she was convinced that what we needed to do was abolish that 45p tax rate. We were changing corporation tax and reversing what Rishi Sunak would have done. And now, of course, she's basically cancelled both of those policies, two major planks. I personally don't think she has a mandate, Vincent.
I don't think she does anymore, and Jeremy Hunt's gone further in this morning's media round by saying, when Liz Truss talked about there absolutely wouldn't be spending cuts, he's saying, well, look, some taxes are going to have to go up, there are going to have to be spending cuts. So any element of Trussonomics that was left, Jeremy Hunt has basically just torn up today.
Why has she appointed Jeremy Hunt, of all people?
I think because he is, in many respects, a sort of a well-respected, safe pair of hands minister. But I think she was basically running out of people to go to. I mean, we're getting through chancellors at quite an alarming rate at the moment. He is seen by, even though he's a Remainer and he's unpopular with large parts of the Conservative grassroots because of that alone, he is seen ministerially as a safe pair of hands who could potentially calm the markets. And I think that has to be the #1 priority at the moment.
Albie?
I think that's absolutely right. The calming the markets has to be the #1 priority at the moment. Look, in his interview with Sky earlier on, he was talking about how mistakes had been made over the last 6 weeks, that taxes may not be able to be cut at the same rate that people were expecting, that public spending won't be able to rise as much as people would like, and that what he really wanted to do was reassure the markets and regain the confidence of the British people. I think he had quite a sombre tone in his interview this morning, and indeed in many of his other interviews, as he will do subsequently. And I think that is what's needed, a safe pair of hands, someone that's got a calm steer of things, and that is well respected within the parliamentary party.
But he is a Remainer, and this, for many of our viewers, this is intolerable.
But Liz Truss is a Remainer, David. I think we've got to stop these leave, remain arguments. All of the Conservative Party is united behind Brexit, as indeed is the Labour Party.
Really? I don't buy that.
Well, Jeremy Hunt has said that before, and I believe him when he says that. And so I think it's not helpful to draw up these factions from 2016.
Okay, but what about Jeremy Hunt? Because actually, when he was campaigning, he wanted to cut corporation tax. So now suddenly he likes corporation tax at 25%?
This is actually very interesting, because when he was running for the leadership, of course, he was running, I think, on a corporation tax of almost half that rate. I think what this is an admission of is that actually that plan was not workable. It was not workable to bring down corporation tax to 19%, even though, you know, it's thought that that would provide more growth, because the markets didn't like it. So I think...
But who's running this country, the markets or the government?
Well, the government and the markets always run things in coalition, if you think. The government has to present their policies in a way which both the markets and the British people and the media will respond to in a positive way. And I think because of the lack of the OBR forecast and the ground not being set, that was not the case with the mini-budget.
Well, I agree with that. I think not having, and as I keep saying, not having someone marking your homework is a very bad idea, not having the OBR on the back of that mini-fiscal statement.
And also, David, can I just say, as a free market capitalist, you cannot say, on the one hand, that you want more investment in the country and you believe in free markets, and then say, are the markets running the country? You know, the whole point of fiscal conservatism and capitalism is to be doing things, putting in policies which are going to reassure the markets, and the policies that have been put in place have done the exact opposite.
They have indeed. The reaction after her speech, borrowing costs rose to 4.3% sterling, then dropped to $1.118 US. Embarrassing.
It's a very difficult situation, David, and what needs to happen next week and in the subsequent weeks before the fiscal statement is I hope that Liz Truss can survive, and that fiscal statement with the OBR forecast
Do you want her
can
to survive?
Yes, of course, because I think it would be very difficult now...
Will she survive?
We don't know the answer to that question, David. I think it would be very difficult now to replace the leader, because that would be the general election, which the Conservatives would almost certainly lose.
So let's, Vincent, going back to Jeremy Hunt, of course, he opposed slashing that national insurance rise as well. He believes that money should go into social care. Again, in terms of income tax, he said that the abolition of that 20% down to 19% is the wrong thing. So Liz Truss has put in Chancellor someone who fundamentally opposed everything, pretty much, she stood on.
That's right, but the key is now confidence. People have lost confidence in Liz Truss, whether that's the markets, her own party, and the public. And the overriding priority is to restore confidence in Britain generally. And I think Jeremy Hunt is literally saying anything he can to get that confidence back. Because I think the key thing now, as many of your people emailing in have said, is lots of people want a general election. Now, I don't believe the Conservatives can do that and allow that to happen, because they are so far behind in the polls that it's turkeys voting for Christmas. Dozens of Tory MPs would lose their seats, so they mustn't allow that to happen. So while they're all deeply unhappy with Liz Truss, they can't agree on a strategy that allows them to take it forward in a way where they can unite behind one candidate. So they're in this terrible position of not having confidence in their own leader, not knowing how they can get out of it without being seen as an entire clown show by the whole nation.
But
really.
I keep saying, my friends who are Conservative MPs, they've all gone to ground, as you rightly say, they're worried about their majorities, but the letters are starting to go in. Graham Brady, we said, it must be the busiest man in Britain, and clearly getting all these letters in, and they are marshalling themselves against Liz Truss. I honestly can't see her surviving.
But I think what's the alternative? And what they can't coalesce behind...
What about Sunak and Mordaunt? That's been mooted.
That's right, that's a possibility, but it would divide parts of the party. There is no single candidate, I think, where people will unite behind. And not only that, but we get back to the mandate issue that we've all been discussing, which is people will feel they would want a general election over this, and that I don't think the Conservative Party can allow that to happen, because not only would they lose that election, they risk being out of power for 2 or 3 terms, and they're very worried about that.
Do you think we're in a... I mean, I think it's really fascinating. We've talked about this before. The Conservative Party, the one thing they're really good at is destroying themselves, and we've seen that repeatedly over history. I think they're in this sort of death spiral currently.
Look, I think to think that last year we won the Hartlepool by-election, a red wall seat in the north turning blue, to where we are now is actually is pretty depressing for me as a Conservative to see. And what I want to see now is the party come back together and really focus actually on just delivering what we promised in the 2019 manifesto. I think the problem with what Liz Truss was proposing was that it was such a deviation from what the general election win in 2019 was, and it went even faster and further than what she was was even proposing throughout her leadership campaign. Now, I sincerely believe that had she just implemented the national insurance contributions rise cancellation and potentially the corporation tax rise cancellation, that perhaps none of this would have happened at all.
I would agree.
I think the problem is that she tried to go even further than that, and there was no need for it.
And you see, it was the timing, that 45p tax rate, although I may agree with it, and it was 2 billion, which, you know, is a small amount of money, but actually it was the timing of that, it was the messaging, it was how it was delivered, it was a disaster.
Precisely. I often say when I'm asked this question, what do you think of the policies? I think the policies were fine, but the cadence was wrong.
I would agree with that. And interestingly, Indigo Blue, good morning to you. Indigo has picked both of you up, saying Jeremy Hunt is not a safe pair of hands. He was a disastrous health secretary.
I think people would disagree with that. I mean, I think that Jeremy Hunt did a reasonably good job in difficult circumstances. I'm not a particular fan of many of the things that he would do and is planning to do, but given the other candidates on offer, I think he's probably the least worst option in many ways.
So let me just ask you, Albie, I know this because obviously I have a vested interest. The other parties are now on an election footing. They think a general is coming. Do you think a general is coming?
I think the Conservative Party will do everything they can to prevent a general election from happening. I mean, if we are to believe the polls, we're 30 or 33 points behind in the polls, which is a landslide even bigger than we saw in 1997. So I think the Conservative Party will do everything they can to avoid a general election. I think if we are going to be looking at changing the leader, I think the only leader that could be brought in that would avoid a general election would be bringing back Boris Johnson.
I mean, it's extraordinary you say that. And I do wonder whether the members are now thinking, what on earth did we do? Well, I know the members are thinking that, but do you think that is the feeling within the Conservative Party? Boris Johnson is now being heralded as the Messiah. Now, interestingly, Stephen says here, Boris Johnson is not the Messiah. He was not responsible for that 80-seat majority. Nigel Farage won him his majority, and Johnson did nothing with it. And reform should be approaching Conservative MPs with a view to joining the party and crossing the floor.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it? You couldn't write a movie like this, could you? And there is a sort of a groundswell among many people that Boris Johnson should come back. I think the big problem at the moment is,
could he
come back? Anything is possible these days. If you've asked me this a year ago, I'd have said definitely not. Now, I wouldn't bet on anything. The critical thing is there's no mandate really for any of this, and financially, there still remains, even after these U-turns, potentially a £40 billion black hole, which still has to be fixed. And until that is fixed, and the nation's finances are on a more secure footing, anything happens. But the critical thing at the moment is all of these policies, whatever your political views, have no mandate, and that is a pretty insurmountable problem as far as I can see for the Conservative Party to get around.
But what I would say, Vincent, in that black hole, which, you know, of course it's there, but I actually think that represents an opportunity for the Conservative Party, because, of course, Labour also back the two tax cuts which are still in place, which are the income tax being brought down to 19p and that being brought forward to 2023, and, of course, the national insurance contributions rise, which Labour voted against. So the opportunity for the Conservatives to say there is, well, Labour don't have an answer to this either.
But Labour...
They actually want to spend more on their great British energy company. So there is an opportunity there for the Conservatives if they can be politically savvy about it.
Isn't the issue here that the Conservative Party have been so busy dealing with their leadership campaigns, taking their eye off the ball? People are struggling in terms of heating. We have no concerted energy strategy. We know that people are really struggling. I don't think they have the British public behind them.
I don't think they do at this point. And what the public do see is there's all these problems in all areas of the public services at the moment, the National Health Service, the transport system, the criminal justice system, and no answers are being provided to those things because there's just this implosion in the government and the Tory party that has just crippled the whole running of government, and it's a huge problem, and people are really, frankly, absolutely sick of it, and I do think they want change, and I think they want a general election, and I think the Conservatives will do all they can to avoid that because it would be catastrophic for them.
Yeah, I would agree. So just looking forward in the next 48, 72 hours, I think we're going to see something extraordinary happen. I don't know what it is. How do you see it playing out?
I see Jeremy Hunt continuing to do his media round, probably today and also on the Sunday morning shows tomorrow. I think we'll then see what the market reaction to that is on Monday. I personally think he has struck a good tone. He's been quite honest about the difficult decisions that are going to have to be made. But really, the question for me isn't about the next 48 hours. It's really about the next 2 weeks before the mid-term fiscal outlook. It all hinges on whether or not the government and Liz Truss can survive until then.
But why couldn't Kwasi have stayed on until then?
I think the reason Kwasi couldn't have stayed on until then is because in order for Liz Truss to survive, she needed to find a fall guy, otherwise she would have been taking the blame. So she found that fall guy in Kwasi Kwarteng. She
What
got
does
rid
that
of him
say about
and
her
brought in
when
Jeremy
you
Hunt.
throw your very close friend under a bus?
David, this is politics. Friendships and political ambitions are two different things. What she
Isn't that
made
a sad
was a
state of affairs?
political choice, which prime ministers and cabinet ministers have made for centuries. What she needs to do now is really just focus on listening to what Jeremy Hunt has to say, uniting the Conservative Party behind her vision, and surviving the next 2 weeks.
I mean, interestingly here, this one from N Probert saying, "Hi, David, the problem is Boris should never have gone," which is the point you made, Vincent. "The Tories and the media turfed him out, and the electorate are being left to wonder what's going on. Hunt is a joke." And this one I thought was really interesting about Jeremy Hunt, and many people feel this. Jeremy Hunt says, Glow in Dartford, good morning to you. Glow says, Jeremy Hunt was a failure as health minister to many Chinese contracts, and people are very worried about Jeremy Hunt and his links to China, and his failed dealing with the Cygnus pandemic exercise recommendation. So are you not worried about Jeremy Hunt and his position on China?
I think it's a little bit unfair for people to say they're worried about his position on China, basically because he's got a Chinese wife. I don't actually think it is appropriate to be bringing people's wives and partners into politics. Let's focus on the politicians, not the spouses. If you want to talk about Jeremy Hunt's record as Health Secretary, that's absolutely fine, but I don't have any concerns over his links to China. I actually think that she has made a shrewd decision in bringing Jeremy Hunt in as the Chancellor, because I think it actually has the potential to be quelling a lot of the rebels who are big fans of Jeremy Hunt. And of course the other risk to Liz Truss's premiership is not just the market reaction, but it's the reaction of the parliamentary party.
So as a Brexiteer, bringing Hunt in incensed me. It literally pushed all my buttons, because...
But did Liz Truss as Prime Minister incense you?
No, because they chose her. I mean, that was up to them. I thought it was the wrong choice. Quite frankly, I would have had Penny Mordaunt.
Fair enough. To be fair, Liz Truss was not my choice for leader either. There were probably, you know, Rishi Sunak is who I voted for in the end. Penny and Kemi were people I supported initially. But ultimately, look, the Conservative Party members decided who the leader was, and now it's time for us to unite behind her with her new cabinet in place so she can deliver for the party.
It's a very good
and
message,
for the British
Albie.
people.
Very good message to the Tory party faithful. Very good. On brand. What happens now? Do certain politicians, let's say Nigel Farage, does he scent blood?
I think they all scent blood. I think the issue now for Liz Truss is just one of personal political survival. Every day is a victory. You have to get to the statement on October the 31st, then you have to look towards Christmas, and then you have to look towards something happening and things improving in 2023. You don't have to have an election until 2024. You run the game as long as you can and hope that something changes, that you don't face political annihilation, which is the way it looks at the moment.
It really does. Vincent, thank you very much, and Albie, thank you very much indeed. Now